Hello, everybody. Welcome to OAF Talks 2019, the panel discussion which we've been doing in conjunction with the Outsider Art Fair for a number of years. I'm Andrew Edlin. I'm the CEO of Wide Open Arts. And I've been up at the Metropolitan Pavilion all day where the walls are going up and the art is starting to get moved in, and we hope you'll be able to attend the Outsider Art Fair, which starts this Thursday afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the new museum and Massimiliano Gioni and his team for hosting this panel. I'm guessing that Massimiliano didn't realize he was embarking on a new career on the Outsider Art Talk circuit when he decided to include so many outsider artists in the Venice Biennale in 2013. He's been very generous with his time, and we appreciate it. We take a lot of pride in the talk series, and this one came to pass more organically than most. I was reading the New York Times book review on Dr. Kandel's new book, The Disordered Mind. And there was a mention of a section about the connection between mental illness and artistic creativity. It sounded pretty relevant. And as luck would have it, I grew up in Riverdale with Dr. Kandel's son, Paul. And a call was made and the ball was rolling. And after the call, it did occur to me that having a Nobel Prize winner for a dad was a lot to live up to. How's that going, Paul? And after the talk, we're going to be able to join Dr. Kandel for a book signing. So I hope you'll participate in that. I also want to thank our assistant director, Allison Galgiani, who's been key in organizing this event, and our director, Becca Hoffman, who couldn't be here because she's, watching everything at the Metropolitan Pavilion right now as the show gets built. Lastly, I would like to thank Franklin Furnace for co-sponsoring this event, and I'm happy to have Martha Wilson here to introduce our panelists. Martha is the founding director of Franklin Furnace and a renowned artist in her own right. She's represented by PPOW Gallery here in New York. Please, let's welcome Martha.
Thank you, Andrew, for making me look so good. I'm going to introduce the panel, starting on your left. Massimiliano Gioni, Edlis Neeson, Artistic Director of the New Museum, will be the moderator of the panel tonight. In addition to the numerous exhibitions he's organized at the museum and elsewhere, Gioni is widely known in the field of outsider art for his curation of the Encyclopedic Palace at the Venice Biennale in 2013, which stood out for its groundbreaking inclusion of artworks by dozens of artists who had no formal training. Gioni has regularly featured art created outside the mainstream in shows like The Keeper, 2016, Nostalgia, 2011, and After Nature, 2008. Dr. Gerhard Dammann is a Swiss psychiatrist, psychologist, and psychoanalyst. Since 2006, he has been the medical director of the psychiatric clinic in Münsterlingen and hospital director of psychiatric services Thurgau. He and his wife Karine collect art brut and outsider art from the context of psychiatry, that is to say, by artists who have experienced psychiatric disorders and treatments. Dr. Eric Kandel is the Fred Kavli Professor at Columbia University and a senior investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. He is the recipient of the 2000 Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for his study of learning and memory. He's the author of numerous books, including his most recent, The Disordered Mind, Farrar, Straus and Giroux, New York, 2018. Now I'm going to tell you how I know Linda Carmela Sibio. West Virginia Schizophrenic Blues was the title of a piece Linda Carmela Sibio did for Franklin Furnace's Asylum in the Anchorage performance art series in 1991. The Anchorage is the footing of the Brooklyn Bridge. Creative Time invited Franklin Furnace to use the space, which has a warren of rooms with 30-foot ceilings. Linda created West Virginia Schizophrenic Blues as a tombstone for her mother, Anne Sibio. It was her intention to take an image from the piece, embed it in metal, and in so doing, create her tombstone. However, Linda never had the courage to go back to West Virginia, where so many traumatic things had happened to her, her family, her mother, and her father. The West Virginia piece set the tone for Linda's work from the 1990s to today, investigations into madness and creativity. In the piece, she portrayed her mother's incarceration in mental hospitals in West Virginia and Ohio. These were dire times in state hospitals, the days of lobotomies, shock treatments, overuse of psychiatric medications, isolation rooms. Linda's mother lived through all of this for 15 years, only to commit suicide when she was finally released. To present this performance artwork, Linda built an installation comprised of a chain link fence, a long rope to swing on, a jungle gym covered with old film stock. There was a hopscotch game drawn on the floor next to a cage with a kitchen on one side because her mother loved to cook Italian food. Linda explored why her mother was considered insane by playing her mother to understand the psychology of why she acted in a violent and angry, sad way her whole life. The piece was 5 hours long. Linda played all the members of her family, at one point actually vomiting on stage. At intermission, half the audience left, but the other half stayed to see where Linda was taking us. Before Linda did this piece, she worked with unmedicated, mentally disabled people on Skid Row. She longed to understand their talks so that she could understand her own diagnosis of schizophrenia. Through performing West Virginia schizophrenic blues, Linda was able to understand her mother and the trauma she had inherited. She also got much more. She saw insanity as a way out, a freedom. I look forward to the panel's discussion.
Welcome everybody again, and I think I'll just let Professor Kandel start the proceedings, as they say.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. I thought that tonight I might give you a description of my new book, a little propaganda, The Disordered Mind. In this book, I asked the question, how does human nature, the thoughts, feelings, memories, and behavior that make us who we are, arise from the physical matter of the brain? The brain achieves consciousness of self and performs its remarkably swift and accurate computational feats because its 100 billion, 1,000 million nerve cells, its neurons, communicate with each other through very precise connections. These connections, known as neural circuits, can be altered by experience, which enables us to adapt to changes in our surroundings. But the connections can also be altered by injury or by disease. They may fail to form normally during development or even fail to form at all. Such cases result in disorders of the brain. Historically, neurological and psychiatric disorders have been regarded as fundamentally different depending on whether they appear to affect the brain or the mind. In reality, the brain and the mind are inseparable, and today our understanding of brain disorders has evolved from the simplistic view to a more nuanced one. Both neurological and psychiatric disorders can affect every aspect of brain function: perception, action, memory, volition, motivation, emotion, empathy, social interaction, thought, attention, and consciousness. In fact, these two classes of disorders, the neurological and the psychiatric, overlap at their margins. It is easy to view brain disorders as simply tragic or frightening, and to consider the profound effects they have on the lives of patients and their family. That's understandable. But there are also other ways of looking at these disorders that are both more realistic and more hopeful. Brain disorders provide a window into the healthy brain. The more scientists and clinicians learn about disorders from observing patients and from research, the more they understand about healthy brain function, and the more they're likely to be able to develop effective treatment for brain disorders. The more the rest of us learn about brain disorders, the more likely we are as individuals and as a society to understand and empathize with people who have these disorders, and the less likely we are to stigmatize them. Today as never before, the study of brain disorders is giving us new insights into the normal functioning of our mind. What we're learning about schizophrenia, depression, and Alzheimer's disease, for example, can help us understand the neural circuits involved in thought, feeling, and memory, just as surely as studies of these neural circuits can help us understand brain disorders. In a larger sense, much as a component of a computer reveals its true function when it breaks down, so the function of brain's neural circuits become dramatically clear when these circuits falter or fail to form correctly. We now know that all mental functions, including disordered mental functions, can be traced to particular locations and sets of locations in the brain. This fact was first demonstrated dramatically in the 1930s by Canada's renowned neurosurgeon Walter Penfield, who operated on people suffering from epilepsy caused by scar tissue that had formed after head injury. Penfield discovered that when he stimulated the temporal lobe, part of the brain that is just above the ear in his patients, the patient would suddenly say, "Something is coming back to me," as if it's a memory. I hear sounds, songs, parts of a symphony. Or I hear the lullaby that my mother used to sing to me. Penfield began to wonder if it were possible to locate a mental process as complex and as mysterious as memory in the physical brain. Eventually, he and others determined that it is possible to do just that. In the 60 years since Penfield's retirement, we have learned more about the brain and its disorders than we did during all the previous years of human history combined. Decoding the human genome has revealed the ways in which genes dictate the organization of the brain and influence behavioral disorders. Brain scanning technology enables scientists to track particular mental processes and mental disorders to specific regions of the brain. While a person is alert, with active nerve cells lighting up to create highly colored maps of brain function. Thus, the greatest challenge for science in the 21st century is to pick up where Penfield left off, to understand how our physical brain gives rise to our rich cognitive, behavioral, and emotional life. Many policymakers agree. In his 2013 State of the Union address, President Barack Obama announced a massive multi-million-dollar public and private initiative to understand the human brain. The practical benefits of this initiative are legion. Not only is this initiative beginning to provide a scientific basis for understanding our conscious self, it's also improving our understanding of brain disorders. People have an enormous curiosity about themselves, about their brains, their mind, and its disorders. Moreover, we now know that the gap between the humanities and the sciences can readily be bridged, that science can be explained in fairly general terms, can become part of the general culture that is as accessible and as interesting as ballet, opera, and history. This is important because people in a democratic society are confronted not only with private decisions regarding mental health care, but also with public policy decisions. To make good decisions, they need to inform themselves about the brain and its disorders. In my new book, The Disordered Brain, What Unusual Brains Tell Us About Ourselves, it was born of the need to explain how the process of the brain can give rise to mind and how they can become disorders resulting in devastating diseases that haunt humankind: depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, autism, post-traumatic stress disorder. An understanding of these disorders is essential not only in the search for new treatments, but also for increasing our general understanding of the brain. In fact, the biology of brain disorders is even beginning to unravel the mysteries of consciousness. In addition, we now have evidence that psychotherapy, the talking cure, is a biological treatment. It actually changes the brain. Finally, in my book, I attempt to illustrate how studying what goes wrong in the brain may also contribute to the development of a unified theory of mind. Seen in this light, understanding the biology of brain disorders represents not only a scientific and clinical goal of great promise, but one of the ultimate aspirations of humanistic scholarship. It is part of the continuing attempt of each generation of scientists to understand human thought and human action in new terms. Thank you very much.
Will you sit here to see the slides?
Shall I move?
No, you don't have to, as you, sorry.
No, it's just a question because you will not be able to see the slides.
Oh, I see.
If you want.
I'll turn around so I can see it.
Or go with the first row.
Yeah, turn around.
That's fine.
So,
So thank you very much for this very kind invitation to New York and to be part of this panel tonight. The very first collectors of so-called outsider art were psychiatrists. Later, artists started to become interested in it, and today these works of art are highly well-weighted, even in the art market. In the next 15 minutes, I will give you a short overview about the history of psychiatric approaches to outsider art or art of the insane from its beginning through today. I will also show some example of works, immodestly, but perhaps most interesting to you, which most of them my wife, Karen, and I have collected. I will define 6 different distinct historical periods. This is just an overview about the different periods of history. I will come back. Before 1880, there are almost no surviving works that can be recognized as works of persons with mental illness. Also, we can be sure that these persons always engaged in artistic activity. The reason is that before the 19th century, psychiatric hospitals did not exist, and most works were destroyed or seen as worthless. One famous exception is a very interesting drawing of a priest in the Vatican Library of the 14th century, Oppicinus de Canistris. We are happy to have 2 examples of this period in our collection of works that survived by chance. A heraldic sheet from 1720 with a chaotic text and fantasy sheets. A note on the back reads, by the mad painter Bayer. We are especially happy that we were able to learn more about this anonymous work, allowing us to identify the artist. He was a painter at a small university which no longer exists today, Altdorf near Nuremberg. His name was Abraham Breuer, and he was known as Mad. Another work remains anonymous. A carved bed from a French psychiatric hospital, Bonneval, near Chartres, made of oak of bad quality. The bed features stylized bamboo and impressive symbolic heads. It's dated around 1860. They remind me of Munch. Moving on the next second historical period. In the 19th century, psychiatry developed as its own medical discipline derived from internal medicine. Around 1880, psychiatrists started to collect works to use them as material for describing psychopathology to students. A famous example is a collection of the forensic anthropologist Cesare Lombroso in Turin, Italy, who tried, for example, to detect criminality by ear shape. Of course, some psychiatrists also collected these works because they loved their aesthetic quality. We have some works collected by psychiatrists from France, Peru, Germany, or Spain. This artist was killed. He was an architect. He was killed by the Nazi so-called euthanasia program. The next period, period 3, started with a bang in the early 20s. 2 books were published from the collections of 2 psychiatrists, going far beyond psychiatric diagnostics. Hans Prinzhorn's book, Art History of the Mentally Ill, came out in 1922. Prinzhorn, a physician and art historian, was commissioned to enlarge an already existing collection from Kreppelin in Heidelberg. He wrote to clinics from all over Europe, asking them to send him works. Around 5,000 pieces were sent to Heidelberg. His ingenious idea was to explicitly request items that were formally or thematically unusual, because in the past, people often appreciated only conventional, beautiful, aesthetic works. Prinzhorn's book was also highly respected by the French avant-garde and surrealists. In his book, Prinzhorn proposed that the same psychic energies plays a role in psychologically ill patients such as Rembrandt. This thesis remains valid today. The observer needs a kind of primal insight, Wesensschau. We are lucky to have some of the few works that left the Prinzhorn collection. They were originally gradually acquired by a French doctor, Dr. Auguste Marie, through an official exchange in the 1930s. The Prinzhorn collection survived because a Nazi used them to show them in an exhibition with modern art, to describe entartete Kunst, that this art is a sort of connected to the very modern art. Probably even more revolutionary was the publication of the book Ein Geisteskranker als Künstler Adolf Wölfli, A Mental Patient as Artist Adolf Wölfli, 1921, 1 year before the publication of Prinzhorn. Author was the Swiss psychiatrist Walter Morgenthaler. Morgenthaler, whose collection is still kept in Bern today, had mentioned his patient Adolf Wölfli not only by name on the book title. Prinzhorn has still used pseudonyms, and he called him a schizophrenic farmhand without ifs and buts, a great artist, something nobody has dared to do before. Artists collected by Morgenthaler include Adolf Wölfli and Heinrich Anton Müller. Here 2 examples also from our collection. This is from Wölfli, and this is from Müller. The 4th period can be characterized by the work of the French artist Jean Dubuffet, who visited Switzerland and the Morgenthaler collection in 1945 and the Prinzhorn collection in Heidelberg in 1949. Dubuffet began to collect on a grand scale with an artist's perspective. He brought together a significant collection that can now be seen in a museum in Lausanne. Dubuffet not only coined the term art brut, raw art, and organized exhibitions, including a significant one in Paris in 1949, but also strongly idealized this art. It was not intended for the market, so Dubuffet. Without any role models, the artists created their works in clinics, prisons, and on the street. From today's point of view, this perspective can stand up to research in the field of art history. Of course, even isolated and mentally ill people are also influenced by the art of their time, be it through newspaper or other things. Dubuffet was not interested in diagnosis, but in the quality of art, so this step was important. From Dubuffet came the famous sentence that there's no more an art from the insane that there is an art of dyspeptic people or the art of people with knee problems. To this day, a precise definition of what exactly are brut or outsider artists remains difficult. Here are some works by artists of our collection that Dubuffet collected. The fifth period started in the 50s and lasted until the end of the 70s. It was of particular importance to our panel this evening. Greater number of psychiatrists turned their interests toward this art once more. In 1959, the International Society of Psychopathology of Expression was founded in Verona. Many meetings took place. A separate journal was created, Confinia Psychiatrica, Borderland of Psychiatry. This journal exists still 1980. Important representatives of this direction were psychiatrists Robert Volmat in Paris, Irene Jakob in Pittsburgh, Alfred Bader in Lausanne, and Leo Navratil in Guking, a clinic near Vienna. Dr. Leo Navratil, who later brought together particularly talented patient artists in his clinic, including August Waller, Oswald Tschirtner, and Johann Hauser, in a separate unit, the House of the Künstler, House of the Artists, coined the term state-bound art. Navratil showed, for example, that his artist Johann Hauser, who was manic depressive, only worked, or you say bipolar, I think now, today, only worked during the manic phases. When he became, this is in the manic phase, when he became depressed, like here just before the transition, his creativity extinguished. The analysis of model psychosis under LSD also became theoretically significant. Important contributions during this period came from Roland Fischer, an Hungarian-born experimental researcher and psychopharmacologist working at the University of Ohio. Roland Fischer began looking for an explanatory model of psychosis for schizophrenia in the late 40s, comparing it to altered states produced by hallucinogens and describing some recurring rhythmic and ornamental elements during creativity of schizophrenia. Indeed, some aspects of these psychiatric approaches are interesting. For example, you can see the so-called horror vacui, fear of emptiness, in some works. Or what psychiatrists describe as delusional mood, the environment as perceived by the patient changes into puzzling, mysterious, and stage-like scenery. You can see this clearly in the work of Wilhelm van Genk, a very important Dutch outsider artist whose complex delusional system concerned the street and railways of his city, Amsterdam. So in this picture, there's a dynamic that something can happen or will happen. Louis Wain was a very gifted, though conventional English animal painter. In a paradigmatic example, it was only a psychosis that made him of artistic interest. Both works are dogs from Wain. The work of autistic artists are often more static, however, fewer emotional dynamics than works by people with psychosis like schizophrenia. But you can also see the quality differences here in these works. The work of mentally retarded artists is often graphically appealing, but not infrequently has a less transgressive depth. Here you can find a connection to children's drawing most likely. Patient without psychosis, but who have experienced a sexual trauma in childhood or adolescence and which are often diagnosed as borderline patients, show a typical recognizable style. Here you can see the attacks on the female body in these drawings. Why this modern psychiatric perspective backed by neuroscientific theories nevertheless came to an end can be nicely illustrated by the following example. Chirtner and Waller were both schizophrenic, but in every other respect, as artists and as people, they were quite different. Schizophrenia explains very little. Of course, everything takes place in the brain, like Professor Kandel talked before, with its functional asymmetry and the two hemispheres. However, I find art psychology and psychodynamic approaches more interesting, where fantasies, symbolizations, and sublimations are concerned. The idea of the transferential object of Winnicott and his comforting function is also very interesting. Note the similarity of subject Joyce in these two works of indurant women who painted themselves as defenseless animals with a human face. One is, they are self-portraits. One is a famous Mexican artist, of course, Frida Kahlo. The other, the Unica Zürn, the partner of the surrealist Hans Bellmer. The work of the French patient Sylvain Fuscot, who had killed a woman, was created only a few months before he, as a result of the neglect of psychiatric patients, starved to death in 1940 in a clinic near Lyon, like thousands of others in Europe. This was some months before he starved from death. He made this painting, a schizophrenic painter. The last and sixth period is again driven by art. A very important source of ideas was the Swiss curator Harald Seemann, who rediscovered the Prinzhorn collection in the 1960s. For example, in the contemporary art exhibition Documenta 5, 1972 in Kassel, he combined outside art with contemporary art, like Massimiliano Gioni did it in the Biennale. He also contributed some important ideas for this art, which continue to drive the discourse today. The idea of individual mythologies, the idea of the so-called tendency towards the total work of art, and the obsessive. Janke, former dental student and patient of an Eastern German clinic for decades, spent his entire life studying flying machines and life in outer space, a hermetic system of an individual mythology that is quite common in this field, and Edlin's gallery are showing now like flying machines and works of this kind. Or, influenced by Richard Wagner, there is a so-called tendency towards the total work of art. In German, der Hang zum Gesamtkunstwerk, where graphics, text, and music notes often complement each other without any boundary in the element. An example of an obsessive working through a certain theme are the 950 anonymous Polaroids of Pathos Formula of only female actresses taken directly from television and of the 60s without the aid of any recording, just with a Polaroid. You can imagine the person, we don't know if a man or a woman, must make thousands to get these of this quality. There are currently voices that say that the term outsider art or art brut should be dropped altogether. There only would be art. For better or worse, these works are art would have to exist in a normal context, galleries, fairs, and museums, and would have to be shown alongside so-called academic art. To get a deeper idea about the relation of unusual brains and their production of artworks, it is necessary to understand the controversial history of these approaches. In preparing this presentation, it became clear to me that the history of outsider art can be described as a debate between art-related and psychiatrically or psychologically related approaches. They oscillate between psychiatric-centered and art-centered views. Biographical and psychological aspects are important but often undervalued. With Rudolf Arnheim, we can say the art history of psychotics, artworks created by the mentally ill, spring from the same basic psychological roots as do the works of other artists. Thank you very much.
Lydia, should we start the film?
Huh?
Should we start the film, or you want to say something first?
I'd like to say something and then start.
Okay.
Okay. I'm an artist. I have schizophrenia, and I've been making art since I was about 11. I've gone through nervous breakdowns. I've gone through hallucinations, delusions, suicidal episodes, etc. But I find that madness is interesting in that we learn something from it about freedom of ourselves. And I believe that all of the mentally, quote, ill, the insane people of the world are part of a subculture that speak a different language than other people. And I think too often in psychiatry, people look at what's wrong with the mentally disabled person instead of what is right with them. What are they trying to say as human beings? Okay, and I did a film with my husband, Blake Brousseau, on insanity and creativity, and here's a clip from that. Oh.
Yeah, it's
Film
start,
first.
Start, yeah.
Okay. I'd have to say no. All my philosophy is built around my perceptions as a schizophrenic. In fact, the work I'm working on right now, Holy Dismemberment. What a title! A little depressing. That's what it's about, dismemberment. It has 14 different body parts on 14 different altars, all around the central figure with a spike that's going through the body. And you insinuate that I'm depressing? It's not really that depressing. There's actually a lot of beauty in it. The body parts all have a weapon that's going through them and destroying them. I don't think that's beautiful. I don't think it's beautiful at all. Well, it's the way it's done that makes it beautiful. It's done with a lot of ornate and complicated miniature imagery with a lot of bright color, and it's the ornateness and the bright color which makes it beautiful. Look, I know a lot about painting. I've been painting since I was 11 years old, and I know a lot about that relationship between me and the image, the relationship between the audience and the intimacy that is with the image. I'm sure both of you have used that in your work. I've dealt with that one-on-one thing. I'm really into one-on-one. The audience doesn't really matter a lot in my work.
It's very personal. Let's go back to the question. The question was, if they found a cure for schizophrenia, and it would mean that I would lose my creativity, would I accept the cure? Well, it's like the difference between a medieval artist and a Renaissance artist. I would be a medieval artist because my sense of perspective is different because I'm schizophrenic. My sense of color is different. My sense of design is different. I don't really fit into the contemporary art world. I'm more of a part of a subculture of schizophrenia. And even though I have astute observations about our contemporary society, I would have to say that as a schizophrenic, working in a contemporary art world, that I don't fit in. I mean, we're all contemporary artists, right?
I'm a contemporary artist.
I guess if you want to look at it that way, we are. I'm not really part of the mainstream. But then again, I'm not an outsider artist either because I'm educated. Both of you are more outsider artists, right? You're not educated.
Well, I went to high school.
Well, I studied with a famous performance artist for 8 years. I think I have some education.
Well, I'm talking more about, education in colleges and universities and stuff like that. That's what makes me not fit into being an outsider artist, and it makes marketing really hard. But I have to say that the most difficult part of being schizophrenic for me is the personal.
Look at me, she said.
Thank you. I'd like to put the scene a little bit in perspective. I'm playing myself. I guess you could tell that all the characters are me. And it was done in a very low budget, and I think the filmmaker did a good job on that, But go ahead. So the summary is that as an artist, part of me hates being schizophrenic because it's sad and it's difficult. But the parts of me love it and find it fun and exciting and wild and different. And part of me just thinks that I'm really great and everyone else is fucked up.
You're probably right.
So I have 3 paintings I'd like to show, and I'll talk just a teeny bit about each one, okay? This one is called Genocide. It's a drawing that's going to be a painting one day. And it was inspired by a movie called Rwanda. And I'm doing a piece at the Andrew Edlin Gallery called Economics of Suffering, where I compare economic power with human suffering and dismemberment and fragility and things like that, as opposed to power and stuff like that. And when I'm teaching my classes, I do the same thing. I teach in opposites. Something opposite like the powerful are opposite to the poor and things like that. So, because opposites make you think differently. They trigger something in your brain that makes you think differently. I'm not really sure exactly what that is, but in this piece I kind of use dismemberment and fragmentation a lot. Those are things that I teach as exercises in art. Okay, is this the same one? Yes.
No, it's a
No,
different
it's
one.
a different one. Okay, this one is the American Indian genocide. Again, I'm tracing genocide as a way of the world not paying attention to what is and trying to squash it. Like in mental illness, they try to squash your thinking and give you meds so that you can't think the way you really think. And I don't think there's anything wrong, really, with the way a schizophrenic thinks. It's the fact that they have emotional problems, and the problems are never addressed emotionally. They give you drugs to correct your mind. So I'm just wondering what the pure schizophrenic mind without the emotional problems might be, you know? It might be interesting. There might be some things you could learn from it. And that's what I try to teach. This one is called Holy Dismemberment. In the movie, I was talking about this painting. And I have this feeling that in life, we all have hard times. And at times, we all feel that we would like to take our bodies apart and be dismembered. And then just knowing in the back of your mind that you could put that body back together if you really wanted to, and see what that was like, dying and being reborn, you know, removing yourself from the suffering and starting over. And I think as a mentally ill artist, that's what I have to do. I dig into the suffering, but through that, I find peace of mind, you know. So that's all I have.
That's a perfect segue to maybe start a conversation between us first, and then open up also to the public. I can't help using this joke, which at this point is probably already old and worn out. I use it on my outsider art tour at this point. It's a joke about the mental patient that is being locked inside the cell, and he furiously knocks on the door, and he says to the doctor and the nurses, say, "Are you crazy? You locked yourself inside." And it's, I think, obviously a paradoxical representation of what we could call the relativism of insanity, which, of course, for people like me who, you know, I'm an amateur in every field, both in the art, certainly not in psychiatry, but attempted in psychology or philosophy. The idea of the relativism of insanity carried a lot of weight, particularly in the 70s, in the anti-psychiatric movement. Certainly, another favorite quote of mine is by Foucault, of course, that says that the doctor does not hold the truth about madness, the patient does. And I don't know exactly what it means. I often think about it. But I'm sure that Professor Kandel has very different views on, if anything, because your work often returns, in a sense, to the hard fact of biology. I'm curious if you do, though, in your work, contemplate, you know, elastic definitions or more malleable definitions of what is normal and what is not normal, what is insane or disorder. In Italy, there is a beautiful series of theatrical festivals put on by people with mental disorders, and the title is "Up Close, Nobody is Normal." And I think it's you know, it's an interesting reflection also in my world when I encounter artists. And I'm curious, first of all, how do you combine in your own work, you know, notions that are inspired maybe by a relativistic definition of normality and insanity with more, let's say, biological facts? And I'm sorry if a lot of this is oversimplistic and impressionistic. But
first of all, I don't work with patients, so my clinical experience is from my own training. I'm trained as a psychiatrist, and I was very much interested in psychoanalysis, so I have some, you know, personal insight into those areas. But I don't work in them professionally. I primarily work on mechanisms of learning in experimental animals and what underlies that. But I mean, the issues that you raise are very interesting. I think one thing would be worthwhile finding out is to what degree is the creative potential that a person who has, let's say, particular psychotic illness, dependent on the psychosis, if the psychosis clears up spontaneously or through treatment, does the creative drive drop away? That's really quite interesting because one argument would be it's completely dependent upon the
Right.
psychotic state, and the other is it's an independent process that it's fortunate to emerge given the fact that the individual is having problems, just thinking straight. So to see to what degree somebody, for example, going through therapy, either pharmacotherapy or psychotherapy, as their illness improves, does their art degenerate?
Yeah, well, that was a question reading your book, and now I don't want to veer into Frankensteinism, but your book is, as you know, extremely fascinating, is also almost comprehensible to a complete ignorant person like me. What was particularly fascinating was to see how you almost described the location of mental disorders in concrete physical positions in the brain. That's what I was fantasizing. And in genetic, almost genetic manipulation. So the question which I realize is barbaric.
You are projecting my fantasy rather than my reality. Obviously, all the psychiatrists in the audience and the biologists working on this feel that in the goodness of time we will really have a rigorous understanding of psychiatric illnesses as we have diseases of the heart and the lung. We're, in most cases, quite far away from that, but there's no reason to believe we won't get there. And certainly now with new techniques, I mean, just in my own career, when I began, there really were no useful imaging techniques that one could use to study the brain. And now imaging is a fantastically powerful tool. So one can visualize different areas of the brain quite successfully. And not only that, do it dynamically while the patient is undergoing various psychological tests or responding to questionnaires and things like that. So I think we're in a much better position to progress on that.
Do you think you could localize creativity or eventually come to a point in which creativity could be produced? I know this is an extreme fantasy probably. Or
no.
I imagine artists without problems.
Which I think is unlikely, that it's a distributed function of the brain. But it's probably not. I mean, we know, for example, that certain lesions can enhance creativity. It's been described quite frequently. A lesion in the right frontal area enhances creativity in people. And that has been quite described, that the right area inhibits, the right hemisphere inhibits the left hemisphere. And getting rid of that inhibition, disinhibiting it, brings out creative potential. So these things haven't been adequately studied. There are few people working on it, but not nearly enough given the fascination of the problem.
And I'm sorry to focus on you first, but it's you are the only second Nobel Prize that has spoken at the New Museum. So it's a great honor to have you. And then we'll continue with all the panelists. But the question is, what role? I mean, you explicitly speak about, and I'm stealing this question actually from Andrew, how interaction among creative people is essential. No? As much as you talk about a sort of biological origin of creativity, you also speak largely about education and interaction. I think your book about Vienna is mostly about the context creating.
I write a lot about that because I myself have benefited enormously from the intellectual and social context with my colleagues. I wouldn't say it's a prerequisite. I think there are different ways of being creative, different ways of doing science. There's some people who do extremely creative science, working largely on their own, interacting with colleagues in the hall, discussing things, but not necessarily being involved in detailed, intimate collaborations. So that varies a great deal among people. And creativity is not a single process. Your creativity is different from his creativity, different from hers, different from mine. So it varies a great deal. And lots of other things feed into it.
One of the points you make throughout your book is a notion that I'm a little suspicious about as a, let's say, art historian or a curator, which is the idea of universalism. And, unfortunately today we also live in a moment in which anything universal is quite more or less dramatically opposed.
Right,
You know,
we like universals if it means us.
Yeah.
We don't like universals if it means you.
yeah. Well said. One of I don't remember even if it's your own quote or you're quoting actually Princeton, but you write about the eruptions of a universal human creative urge. Do you
I
believe
don't write like that.
that's probably Princeton? But do you believe there is a universal quality to creativity? And
No.
okay,
I think you are different from him, is different from her, different from me. We're different people. Now, obviously, there are common structures involved and common processes involved in creativity, but each of our character structure is different. We'll bring that character structure to bear on it. So there's a lot of variations. The fact is the outcome is often quite similar because the kinds of problems we're trying to solve at any given time in history share great similarities.
maybe we'll ask also
Sure.
a little bit from our guests. Gerhard, I mean, going back even to the first question about, let's call it the anti-psychiatric movement and its impact on the appreciation of outsider art. I mean, you touched upon it.
I don't understand. What is the anti-psychiatric movement?
Well, in
As a
Italy,
psychiatrist, you make me feel insecure about my future.
in Italy, it's very specifically identified with the work of Basaglia, who was the doctor that put an end to the psychiatric hospital as we know it. More broadly, it became a synonym for the protest against, and I'm not saying I buy that notion, because also I think eventually William Reich was also considered somewhat a predecessor of.
Giants in the field.
Yeah, but I think Deleuze and Guattari are typically seen as being inspired by the anti-psychiatric movement about notions
This
of.
is absurd, an anti-psychiatric movement. We want to make psychiatry better, so you can say, we don't recruit the very best people into psychiatry. That might be a legitimate argument. But we certainly need a discipline like that. You may change the name of it, but you need somebody who addresses disorders of the mind.
I think the label referred to oppressive practices, particularly in asylums, that identify with outdated notions of
lobotomies and things like,
or
psychiatrists have done
tying people to the
terrible
bed,
things,
or
and other disciplines also, but psychiatry has been particularly bad.
Basaglia introduced a whole different model to hospitals, and it became quite well known. So that's what the anti. But going back to you, Gerhard, I don't know if you have thought about that chapter, let's say, in the reception of outsider art, and if it has ever been inspiring for you, both as a collector and as a psychiatrist. You don't have to say yes.
I can, of course, give different answers on this aspect. One is that, of course, art and the possibility of persons with problems or mental illnesses, that they can build works of art, that can make drawings in the hospital, can give them a dignity, a sense of life. So art is important, or can be important, and as we often speak from the biological, the psychological, and the social dimension. And perhaps we should add a fourth dimension, the cultural, or even it's a form to even art is a form to get in contact with something of metaphysical aspect in humans. The other aspect is that I don't think that it's the illness directly that create creativity.
No.
But the illness can make first independence. I have heard from professors in art schools that some students today ask them if their works could have success in the art market. So, and the success or the mystery of this art is, of course, when the quality is great, that these artworks are often stronger because the creators don't have the market in the mind. They are more independent. And the other aspect is sometimes you can see an existential dimension that it's part of a system, and that it's not only making drawings, but it's really to work something through. I don't know very good the work of you, Linda, but I have, my impression is that you really are not only making pictures or drawings, but you're really working on a sort of an existential system or a way to explain lives and how to be happy, and it has a broader dimension.
Well, yeah, when I make art, I work in multimedia, visual performance, and writing. I also have something to say about creativity in people, because I've taught since 1985 mentally ill people on the streets in Los Angeles and in the high desert now in Joshua Tree. People who have severe mental illnesses, and when they get better, their creativity does not go away. And I believe that anyone in this room can make a great drawing if I showed you how to do it. If you were in my class.
Signing up right now.
If you were in my class, I could get you to do a great drawing. I'm telling you. I think we all have creativity deep inside of us. And if you tap into that, it helps you in your life, you know, in other aspects of your life, being a businesswoman, being an executive. Anyone can excel more with they use their creative mind. And I think the creative mind consists of perception, emotions, and intellect. And you have to make them all work together into one thing, and then you reach your subconscious state or your creative self.
I'm very interested to see how your illness enhances or interferes with your creativity.
Okay.
People who have manic depressive disorder say that coming out of the depression into the mania is so exhilarating from an erotic point of view, from a creative point of view. They find themselves, you know, if they're artists, doing better work and more work than they've done for a very long time.
Right.
And is that also true with schizophrenia? That
Well, in schizophrenia, when I go through like a really psychotic period, I continue to work no matter how
that's
I
wonderful.
feel. And
How does it compare?
I'm not sure when I'm in a very psychotic state exactly what I'm doing, but I continue to do it because I've done it so long. And what happens is I did a show with Andrew years ago called The Insanity Principle, and it was while I was hallucinating, I did the paintings.
Fabulous.
And, because I'm disciplined.
That's terrific.
And I made these paintings that were 8 foot by 4 foot, and some of them were smaller. And I can't sit here and tell you where those paintings came from, except for they were.
In you mean?
Where in me it came from. But I have evidence that I was having hallucinations and stuff because that's what they look like.
The hallucinations are reflected in the art.
Yes.
That's marvelous.
Yes. And I use the hallucinations in a
Right,
constructive
so it shows
way.
you that you use it. That's right.
Yeah.
You ought to write something about that. That's really marvelous.
I did. I've written a book called Reflections in a Broken Mirror. Write that down, and maybe
Can
it'll
you read
get
the title
published.
again?
Reflections in a Broken Mirror. It is not yet published, so
I see.
it's 249 pages, and it has visuals and writing and graphs, like this one. Graphs like this. That's a schizophrenic thinking chart.
Not at all.
Yes.
It doesn't look very schizophrenic to me at all, and I'm a psychiatrist.
Well, you have. Well, I'm a schizophrenic.
No.
I'm a schizophrenic, and you read it this way, and it's very schizophrenic. You create a word salad.
It's like
It creates a word salad. I'll
No,
put
you
you
see,
through the
you're
exercise.
really missing an interesting point.
I'll put you through
May
the
I hold this up?
exercise.
May I take this?
Yes.
This is a wonderfully interesting drawing, if you will. So you look at the numbers, you think it's all chaotic, there's no system at all. But if you look carefully, you see that in each line, she carries a theme. 1, 2, 3, 4,
Only
5,
in that-
6,
yes,
7, 8,
exactly.
9, 11, 12, 13. This is terrific.
Okay, here's how you read it, Mr. Kandel. You go down this way, okay?
You're telling me I can read it the wrong way, but if I read it the right way,
No, you can read
not
it.
like in Hebrew, I'm reading it like in English, from left to right.
No, when you want to get the schizophrenic thinking part, you have to read it this way. It becomes a word salad.
I do not agree with your definition of schizophrenic, by the way.
Meet me in an hour, and I'll take you through the exercise.
Can I?
You're terrific.
I'll ask 2 or 3 uncomfortable questions. First of all, I do not believe I share completely your definition of schizophrenia. I also want to be, careful, because schizophrenia, it's not exactly fun, and it's not exactly. So
it's not.
I just want to be, mindful of that. One question.
May I just respond a
Yeah.
little bit to that? I think you may be responding to the way she's functioning now, which
Well,
functions at
describing
least
that.
as well as the three of
yeah.
us may be better. But she's saying that under certain circumstances,
Yeah.
she functions in a very different
Yeah, I was taking exception with that diagram being described as schizophrenic. Sorry, I also don't, these are personal
you
You haven't
and
really gone through the
You're
exercise.
applying.
I don't think you can really say it's not schizophrenia unless you go through the exercise and feel it and see if it's really puts you in a schizophrenic state of mind.
Yeah, she may be in a state in which she's schizophrenic, in which
Yeah.
we would all agree we would all
but the question, given also your work about Vienna, and this question connects also to what Gerhard was saying about the myth of the artist, as the born under Saturn, and the role of melancholia, depression. I mean, in your book, you write about how these aspects are also scientifically connected with creativity, or that there is evidence that artists are more likely to demonstrate symptoms of bipolarism and so on and so forth. But
I'm sorry, I don't think you're quoting me.
I
This is not,
think I might.
this is not a point that has been very. I may mention that, but it's not an important point in my thinking. I think if somebody really has significant psychiatric problems, it under most circumstances will interfere significantly with their output, with their productivity.
But do you think also artists across centuries, let's even say just in the 20th century, have constructed certain myths about themselves, or culture has constructed certain myths about the artist as often using the stereotype of the mental illness or of the
But
depressed?
the artists vary as much as the four of us vary. I mean, there are some that are very, manic, and there's some that are very depressive, and there's some that are in between.
Perhaps they may be a sort of biological or temperamental base for creativity connected with bipolar disorder. There are some studies showing that in the families of writers and painters, there are more persons with bipolar disorders. But for me, this is not really an important explication. Perhaps one day we will have the locus in the genes for this predisposition. Mm-hmm. But I think you need a lot of more aspects that an individual really get creative.
I don't see why we can't have the genes. What's wrong with them? What are you being anti-Semitic?
To Professor Kandel's credit, I have to say you are quoting Robert Power, who says that people in creative professions have 25% more chances of being affected by bipolar disorders and schizophrenia. So it wasn't your own opinion, you're quoting Robert Power's opinion. Since I'm asking all the annoying questions, an annoying question for the collector and the doctor, which pertains also to my profession as curator, which is the question of ownership. The story of collection in general. There is a great quote. Umberto Eco says the museums are all a form of heist. Each museum is, and it's very relevant today. But if you think also the history of collection of outsider art is often also a history of dispossession, and who owns those works. Yes. Do you have any feelings about it? And what's also, when it comes to galleries and curators, the question of, in a sense, permission or ownership is often complicated.
I agree that this is a very important and complicated question. There are also some real legal questions. For example, the works of the Prinzhorn collection. We don't know if these 5,000 patients all over Europe, they really were asked if they wanted to send them to Heidelberg, the works, or if they put them away from the patients. So it's a really question of ownership. And but my view is that in the most cases, the value of these works are maintained and seen by the interest of the psychiatrists. What I have shown in my short presentation is before psychiatry was developed, nobody collected these works because nobody's seeing interest. So,
but artists were depressed and they were manic, and they were both.
Well, the fundamental...
It wasn't treated as a special category.
Well, the fundamental difference which is often discussed is that an artist can decide this work is too private for me. I don't want to give it for sale or for the public. It's a private work, or and in a hospital context, if somebody is really disturbed, perhaps this decision can be questionable. But I see the problems on ownership, but on the other side, the interest of these about these arts is also a sort of saving these works. I often don't say about I'm not a collector, I'm the guardian of these works for some decades, and then I hope they will be survive.
And Lydia, in your work also with Linda, sorry, in your work also, not your own specific work, but also you mentioned your work as, let's say, art therapy, or collaborations with people also affected by mental disorders. How do you feel about questions of ownership or agency, and do you have any position about it?
I think if an artist does a piece of work, they own it.
Absolutely.
And they can sell it.
Absolutely.
And just because they're mentally ill and they're working in a workshop doesn't make it not their art.
And
Absolutely.
In the most serious galleries today, the artists get the same amount of percent of money like academic as any other artists. And this is very serious.
I have a small company called Berserk Productions, and when we make the people under us, they make art. We help them network and find maybe galleries to help show their work, or places to put it or sell it, or what we can do. We're very small, but we try.
Thank you. Should we open?
May I ask you a critical question?
Yes, please.
To you? Because there are a lot of critical questions toward the psychiatric approach. I understand completely this trying, what you can see a lot of texts and books, persons say, here you can see epilepsy or the depression, and this is not very interesting. I agree. and also the asylum, the suppression in psychiatry, and all the problems, the drugs cutting creativity often, the neuroleptics, it's true. They not only cut the psychosis, but also the creativity. But on the other side, the art historians and museum persons often avoid to discuss on the psychological content of these works. And this makes the works, the texts often not very deep and very interesting. You mentioned Saturn, for example, Klibanski and Abby Warburg and all these persons. They had the courage to speak about the mental energies, but today art historians often they are describing only the biography or the context, but they hesitate to write about the themes, the content of these artworks.
I don't think that's fair at all.
No, I would ask you if this is true.
From Alois Riegel in 1900 in Vienna, art historians have been really quite scholarly in what they call the beholder share, how the viewer responds to a work of art. And that's what most good art criticism is about. So I think you're not doing justice to contemporary art criticism.
But
Would you say that?
Eric, do you really see books where there's something on the content of Schiele's work, for example?
You know,
not describing and not the biography of the models, but really why?
Absolutely.
Hey, hi Eric. I wrote those books.
Would you stand up and... Oh my God, I didn't realize you were here. She's a specialist in this area. And she has written about this.
I mean, I think if I can reply through my personal experience, I think there is a little bit, and I'm always aware also in discussions around outsider art, there is the risk of a kitsch narrative of over-sentimental expression, you know, that I am very suspicious of, and that a lot also of recent art history has been suspicious of, you know, the idea that people express their feelings through art and our job is to read those feelings, and those feelings are the kind of primal, liberated flux of unconscious. I think, you know, that chapter in a sense of art history has exhausted itself. You know, I'm divided because part of me is completely victim of, in a sense, the romance of biography. And, you know, the show, The Encyclopedic Palace, and many of my shows are basically shows about, let's say, existential adventures that have left traces through things that I don't even believe are artworks. They're just interesting visual documentations of life lived. So I am a sucker for a sort of romance of eccentricity and, you know, the adventure of every private life and so on. But I also want to be careful with this idea of the solitary genius or the idea of the self-expression. You know, there is an essay that I often bring up when having this conversation. It's a great essay by Hal Foster about the reception of outsider art among the surrealists. It's called Blinded Insight. And the argument is, the surrealists thought that all these works, basically through Prinzhorn, was a liberation of the unconscious and of primordial sexual, you know, all these ideas that the depth of the inside is the place where things are great. And he says, you know, we should also be careful about it and consider that maybe those works express a longing for order, a longing for structure. You know, if we think of the classic horror vacui or those work, instead of being a resurgence of freedom, might be actually a craving for order, and in a sense they might be ultimately repressive, and I think that's an interesting paradox. So
I think if one looks around the audience, one realizes there are people out there who are everybody as interesting as we are, and we wonder whether it might be worthwhile asking.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Whether some people there
I was
might
just
make
answering
some
the question
as comments.
Let's open it to the
Comments or questions from people in the audience.
Just a short answer. I think now the big interest in this art is also a little bit the authenticity myth. In a completely virtual world, people have the idea that these works are so authentic.
Yeah, and I'm a little suspicious of
Yeah.
that idea that there is an innocence in a sense. But let's hear it from the audience. Maybe, do we want a little more light? Thank you.
I'm curious what several of you might think, but if artist creativity is increasing in a manic stage and not so creative in a depressive state, is it wrong to tamper with that? And obviously, I'm sure many of us have known disorders. Many I've known, they don't want that manic to end, of course, because they're so productive, creative.
We're having a difficult time hearing you. Could you repeat the question? Could you stand up, madam?
Yes. So what I was asking is that if creativity is increasing in the manic stage and decreasing or virtually non-existent in the depressive stage, is it wrong to tamper with that bout of creativity with people who have disorders and who frequently are very happy and productive in that manic state?
You raise a very important question, because there are artists who feel exactly like you do. They don't want to be treated because that's the most wonderful phase of their life. They become not only creatively, but they become sexually very active. It's a wonderful phase for people coming out of the depression and into this manic phase. So you're absolutely right. But it depends on whether the person steps back and wants a long-term view of his disease. That is, the faster you treat, the more effectively you'll be able to control it, or whether you're driven by your instincts.
I think that people who have bipolar disorder, that they need to understand their symptoms and get to know them and see the cycling of them through, and you can do that through art, and that way they're not going to go so far down in the depression, and the highs will still be there.
I know, at least for myself, like part of my interest in looking at works by outsider artists is that they seem to expose this like universal urge to create and express oneself. And I'm curious, from all of your different disciplines as artists, as neuroscientists, curators, psychiatrists, what in the most universal, maybe like simple way you would how you would answer the question, where does that urge to create art come from?
If I knew the answer to that, do you think I'd be sitting here? I'm sorry?
What are your thoughts on that? Where that urge to, it's been forever. It's not just from the beginning of
No, of course, but you're asking about, the deep biology of certain human behavior, and we don't understand that.
Well, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Please,
Oh,
contradict
okay.
me.
I think that creativity comes from both your intellect, your body, your emotions, and your perceptions. And when they're all combined on a certain object, or you're in a certain state of mind, you become creative and excited about what you're seeing, and it spills over from that. That's how it works
If I
for
may
me.
say so,
Yeah.
what you've described as some of the factors that lead to an active creativity. It doesn't really explain the pathways that are involved and how the creative thing is acted. So it's a
Well,
more phenomenological
I'll try
description.
again. Give me a minute.
Thank you for
It's an honor.
Perhaps it's not very precise, but I think the persons who are creative have a sort of hunger.
They have, or
they have a sort of hunger, and many persons are not creative. So, and even in psychiatric hospitals, many are sitting the whole day, looking television, drinking Coca-Cola, and they don't have hunger, an inner hunger. And
Even in psychiatric hospitals, as if.
and I think you can have this in all fields. So my answer will be there is a sort of curiosity, but in a deeper way, a sort of a lack, an inner lack that a person try to fill in being creative. In all fields, writing books, being a scientist.
Hi. So, isn't creativity just it's a primal urge, right? It's a primal urge to communicate and to share stories. And I think I have an Indigenous background, and I think it's also it can also be a very spiritual thing where you're connecting with the dead, you're connecting with spirits, they're coming through you, and you're sharing stories. And a lot of people who have mental illness, who aren't religious at all of a sudden start talking about God or spirits, and it's bizarre. And so I don't know about mental illness. I think it's, who knows what it is, but creativity is a way of sharing stories, is of trying to break things down and understand things, like in the primal ages, trying to put marks on a cave wall and explain things to their people, and create, document history and whatever. Anyway, does any of that make sense?
But you have cases, even especially in this field, where persons worked a whole life and nobody knows that this person have a work of art, an important work of art, and this person nobody share. So I think communication is true, but it could be a sort of inner communication. It must not be always a communication with an audience.
Right.
Or
I
what
agree.
you said, which is just trying to understand things for yourself. So it could be breaking things down, putting things on paper. What you were saying, it may be communicating, or it may be trying to understand your own process or understand what's going on in your brain, and so you're creating all this stuff to create order. Like you said, it's not so liberating and fantastic and awesome. You're kind of possibly trying to create an understanding and order and structure.
yeah,
I mean, I have a sort of a simple-minded view of this. I think people who have any creative urge tend to have a tendency to want to share that with others. One of the great pleasures of creativity is showing this to your wife, and for once she says, this is good. I mean, there's a great pleasure in getting other people's response to your work. So I think most people who do things that at all have some novelty to it get pleasure out of sharing this with their colleagues, with the general public, et cetera, et cetera.
there's a question.
I think that we all are creative, and that so much of,
More in front of
so much of what happens to us in life is that creativity is inhibited.
You're right.
And
By
that
society.
that creative people and many things inhibit creativity, and psychiatric drugs are one of them. So if you take psychiatric drugs, you're making a bargain. You're saying, I may give up some of my creativity to have a happier life, or I may not.
You're absolutely
But
right.
when you look at children's art, children are creative, and so many people just grow up thinking, I can't, I'm not supposed to, I won't. And as a teacher, that's a lot of what I do, is unteaching those
Wonderful.
what we're programmed to believe.
There's a question over there.
I just wanted to say one thing. When I am in preparing for a work of art, I find that compulsively that I need to deal with my past and expurgate trauma and sadness and things like that before I can work. It's like a cleaning out of history.
Thank you to all the panelists. I was wondering to what extent there's a connection between genetics and art and mental illness. So for example, my father is a painter. I also do art, and so does my brother. And I've noticed that our imagery is shared. So we will do independent artwork, and I'll notice, oh, that shape is the same. My dad, likes that shape. That's really interesting. Same with my brother, and similar color choices. So I'm just wondering, maybe there's a genetic component to it, and it may be also tied to mental illness.
I think that's much likely due to social factors rather than genetic ones, although we can't rule it out. You've shared so many experiences together, you share so many attitudes together. So my guess is, even though that has, common genetic background, but it's the social attitude that is being communicated between each of you. It's hard to know, but I would guess that that's it.
May I ask a question that was inspired by another question? A lot of the examples in your book, or a few examples in your book, relate to experimentation on animals. And I'm curious if there are examples of creativity among animals there is the famous Desmond Morris book about monkeys painting, but are there quantifiable experiments that have been carried out to see if animals get creative? I love the example about the mice getting high on electrodes, no?
I'm embarrassed to tell you I don't know the answer to that.
Well, it might be that that means they don't exist.
No. This is a legitimate area, and there is an answer to it. I just don't know it. That's not surprising, but that's a fact.
Well, elephants can paint.
Yeah, not very well, but.
But certainly you can see animals show creativity.
I think that there must be in the prehistoric phases a moment when the primates or human apes put flowers in the graves of their dead.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know when this moment was.
But they're already painting
But
in the shades of Lascaux.
But the monkeys now, the gorillas and others, they don't do that.
But they mourn their loved ones, though.
They mourn,
Chimpanzees
yes.
They have a social life, they enjoy their sex life.
And another aspect is something they build some aspects, but they don't, aufbewahren. They don't preserve them. So
because they have no curators. Should we take one or two more questions and then call it a night? If there are two more questions. One in the front. I used to be a curator monk.
Dr. Kandel, I think you said there was something about the individual diversity of creativity that was dependent on character structure. Does that sound correct?
I didn't say that, but it sounds completely right to me.
Okay, well.
That's your idea, not mine, but I like it nonetheless.
If it sounds right to you, I'll ask my question anyway. Because I'm wondering if you think of character structure as a brain phenomenon, or if there's something that's not just biological about character structure.
But you're confusing terms, if I may say so.
Could be.
But it has a brain structure with something biological. Last I heard of it, the brain is a biological structure. Now, it may have changed its status in the last half hour, but when we came here, that was still the case.
So you see character structure as a different order of structure?
Character structure is an aspect of your personality, and
not
that's a reflection of brain functioning.
Reflection of brain function, but totally based on brain biology?
Completely based on brain biology.
Okay.
But brain biology is based also on the input you've gotten from the environment, from your parents, from your peers, from your enemies, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Thank you.
Last one.
Kandel, you mentioned previously that they found that with psychotherapy, it has changed your brain biology.
Yes, Helen Mayberg has done imaging of people before and after psychotherapy and shown their actual anatomical changes in many patients, if and only if they respond effectively to psychotherapy.
So I'm interested as well in the changes in brain biology as a result of doing artwork.
Of doing?
Of doing artwork, creating, being creative, and actually having an
Wonderful.
organizing effect rather than just as an art therapist. That was my interest.
I think they'd be wonderful to have. These things, one has to take a very simple task and sort of follow it over time and see as it evolves what is happening to the brain. But this is going to happen. I mean, imaging is now becoming so universal. I mean, every, department that has anything to do with brain function usually has some sort of an imaging facility. So people are now looking at the beholder share, how people respond to art. How do you respond to an abstract painting versus a figurative painting by the same artist? I mean, it's an extremely interesting question, and people are beginning to explore things like this.
Even by touch or by movement, by various means.
No, this is looking.
Looking is one way, but...
Yeah, but we're speaking about a beholder share, looking at a work of art.
Right.
How do you respond to the same artist when that artist is figurative and that artist is abstract? I'm just giving you one example. There are many, many examples you could think of.
What is interesting is that there are many cases when artists are in psychotherapy. There is a moment they feel uncomfortable because they know that the dynamics of their creativity or the source is related often to their problems, what I say before with
That's
a
an
hunger
interesting point.
or the lack, and they have a fear that they can lose a central aspect of their creative potential by being more and more normal.
Yeah.
There was one last question there. Do you want to take one or two more? It's 8:40. Well, but there was somebody back there.
No, there's a lady that's been here. She's been...
Oh.
Yes, I was interested in the false self.
The false.
The false self. Donald Winnicott has let people be free and free their children because they took off the lid. He took off, take off the lid of a performative life rather than a real life, rather than living real. That's like some authors of reviews might be these people with the false self. And also the work of Milton Erickson, who released some people by using hypnosis. Could you speak through the mic? Hypnosis is a means of helping people reach their unconscious minds, releasing a great deal of creativity, moving them to a place they wanted to get to. And that was the trance. And we're all supposedly living in a trance, a light trance or a deeper trance, at one time or another, or perhaps all the time. So the two together make sense to me in terms of this work.
Well, we haven't gotten to a question yet, so it's okay.
Yes. I want to know if anyone
This is the hors d'oeuvre.
I don't know if anybody had found the work of hypnosis interesting in terms of the work that you're looking at. Self-hypnosis, self-induced, inducing in hypnosis and response, so on.
Well, there is a huge tradition. One of André Breton's most cited text is The Automatic Message, that discusses the work of artists and medium. Now at the Guggenheim there is a wonderful exhibition of Ilma af Klint. My position is, and maybe I'm sure the experts here disagree, the irony of it all is that through these manifestations we actually see further demonstration of a cultured self, not of a natural self. And I think even the Ilma af Klint, it's so beautiful. Supposedly she's painting under the direction of 5 mysterious minds from above, and she still paints in the tradition of Art Nouveau. That is what she sees around, and I think that's, to me, a great mystery. The deeper we go into the unconscious, the more the unconscious is cultured and not. Yeah. It's culture. The unconscious itself is not, I believe, and I'm completely ignorant about it. It's less nature and primal revelation and more culture. So,
and this, what you say to us, show also the problem of the definition of outsider art.
Yeah.
With a Daga is an outsider artist, but Francis Bacon is not an outsider artist. Or Vincent van Gogh is not an outsider artist. Martin Ramirez is an outsider artist. So often we use the academic education to make these categories. But it's really the question if this category, this works good.
I'm afraid Mr. Kandel wants to leave.
No, not at all.
I'm
not at all.
I'm joking.
I wanted to get her autograph.
No, but I think it's time. We could continue for a long time. Request. Well, there is one over there. She waited. Do you want to do it?
I just wanted to. I know that there is a history of fetishizing mental illness, and also demeaning it. And I saw some of that on the panel tonight, and I was just wondering how Miss Sibio, is that how you pronounce your name?
Sibio.
Sibio. If you had any remarks on that.
That the remarks were demeaning?
Some of the aspects I found were at times demeaning or fetishizing schizophrenia or mental illness of any sort.
Yeah, well, I'm disappointed in a way, the way the talk has gone, because I was curious about how science and creativity can work together, in the mind, with the mind and creativity, and learn from each other, And I thought it would have been better if it was a more plastic conversation. And also, I did notice some of what you're talking about, but I'm so used to it that I just accept it to a certain degree, although it is annoying.
Yes.
I think the problem is